Do you remember the Christmas appetizers from the 1970s that have faded into history? They once filled every holiday table with color, laughter, and the smell of something warm just pulled from the oven. When did those small, happy bites stop being part of how we celebrated? Pineapple cheese ball was the crown jewel of 1970s Christmas parties. Sitting proudly in the center of every holiday spread, it gleamed beneath the warm yellow glow of dining room lights. There was something almost regal about it, a golden orb of cream cheese, crushed pineapple, and chopped nuts rolled together into perfection. It was sweet but tangy, rich but light, a dish that could be spread across a cracker and make anyone feel like they were part of something special. Housewives took pride in shaping them just right, pressing chopped pecans into the sides until the entire surface shimmered. When guests arrived, the first thing they noticed wasn't the roast or the punch, it was the cheese ball. This dish symbolized care and presentation, a reminder that even in the simplest kitchens, creativity flourished. Every bite carried the flavor of holiday cheer and homemade charm, proof that you didn't need extravagance to feel luxurious. It wasn't just food, it was an event rolled by hand, crafted with love, and placed right where everyone could see it. A pineapple cheese ball wasn't complete until it was surrounded by buttery crackers, each one waiting to deliver that perfect mix of sweet and salty joy that defined a 1970s Christmas gathering. Shrimp tree platter was not merely a dish, it was a conversation piece. You could walk into a 1970s holiday party and spot it from across the room, standing tall on the buffet table, wrapped in glimmering foil, and studded with tiny pink shrimp-like ornaments on silver pine. Hosts took great pride in crafting it, pinning cocktail shrimp in swirling patterns around a styrofoam cone covered in parsley, lemon slices, and sometimes even maraschino cherries for extra color. It was equal parts appetizer and spectacle, a true show of mid-century creativity. In an era obsessed with presentation, the shrimp tree represented festivity and ambition. Guests would circle around, laughing as they plucked shrimp off with toothpicks, dipping them into tangy cocktail sauce balanced in a bowl at the base. It brought a touch of glamour to suburban Christmas parties, evoking an image of high living even when it was all homemade. What made it iconic was the balance between decadence and practicality. Simple ingredients, grand results. The shrimp tree was proof that even on a modest budget, you could still impress, delight, and dazzle your guests. It was a centerpiece of joy, built with patience, served with pride, and remembered long after the holidays had passed. Bacon-wrapped water chestnuts were one of those dishes that disappeared faster than anything else on the Christmas table. You could always tell when someone had just baked a batch. The smell of smoky bacon glazed with brown sugar would drift through the house and draw everyone in. They were small, easy to grab, and utterly addictive. The crunch of the water chestnut, hidden under layers of crisp bacon and caramelized sugar, gave them a texture like nothing else. People loved how one bite could deliver salt, sweetness, and warmth all at once. In the 1970s, when cocktail parties were an art form, these little gems were the definition of good taste and good company. You'd find them sitting in crystal bowls or passed around on platters, each one glistening in its syrupy glaze. What made them unforgettable was their simplicity. 3 ingredients, endless delight. They were the kind of appetizer that didn't need explaining. One taste said it all. Every holiday gathering had someone proudly announcing, "These are my famous bacon wraps," as guests reached for more. And even now, decades later, just the thought of that smell can bring you right back to a living room filled with laughter, record players, and the soft twinkle of Christmas lights. Cranberry meatballs were the kind of appetizer that made you stop mid-conversation just to savor another bite. Tangy, sweet, and savory all at once, they combined everything a 1970s Christmas party was about. Flavor, fun, and just a hint of glamour. The sauce, made from cranberry jelly and chili sauce, simmered into something both festive and unexpected. Every little meatball gleamed under its ruby glaze, served hot from a slow cooker or skewered neatly with toothpicks. These were not your grandmother's meatballs. They were holiday meatballs, bold, bright, and made to impress. In an era obsessed with convenience, the recipe felt like a miracle. Affordable, easy to make, yet somehow elegant. Housewives clipped it from magazines and wrote it down in spiral cookbooks, passing it on like a secret. Guests loved how they looked almost too pretty to eat, like edible ornaments. The first bite was pure nostalgia, the sweetness of the cranberry followed by a whisper of spice that lingered. They warmed the room as much as the oven did, proving that even small bites could carry big memories. By the time the party ended, there would never be a single one left in the pot. Cheddar olive puffs were a quirky little wonder that perfectly captured the playful spirit of 1970s entertaining. They looked fancy, but anyone could make them, which was part of their charm. Each puff hid a green olive in its center, baked inside a shell of flaky cheddar dough until golden and crisp. Guests would take one bite, expecting cheese, and find a salty, briny surprise instead. It was strange, delightful, and utterly unforgettable. These snacks were served warm on glass platters, often right beside bowls of nuts and trays of deviled eggs. The smell alone was enough to fill a kitchen with comfort, melting cheese, butter, and a hint of something daring. They represented a time when home cooks loved experimenting, when recipes came from magazines promising to wow your guests in minutes. In their simplicity, they reflected the optimism of the era. Resourceful, creative, and just a little bit flashy. Every batch disappeared before the main course ever hit the table. Cheddar olive puffs were the snack version of the 1970s itself, bold, bright, and unapologetically fun. Salami cornet rolls were one of those appetizers that managed to feel elegant and homemade all at once. Thin slices of salami were spread with soft cream cheese, rolled tight around small pickles or olives, and chilled until firm. When sliced into bite-sized spirals, they looked like little pink pinwheels, a perfect symbol of the colorful, cheerful 1970s. They were a hit at every Christmas open house, easy to make in advance and impossible to resist. The mix of smoky meat, tangy cream cheese, and crisp pickle created a flavor that stood out among a sea of dips and crackers. It was food designed to bring people together, simple enough to share, fancy enough to serve on fine china. The rolls chilled overnight in fridges across America, waiting for the next big party or family gathering. On the table, they gleamed like edible ornaments, proving that even the humblest ingredients could feel special with the right touch. They were snacks that carried conversation, laughter, and memory, made by hand, served with pride, and eaten with joy. Marinated mushrooms were the secret weapon of every 1970s hostess who wanted sophistication without the stress. Tender button mushrooms soaked overnight in herbed vinaigrette, absorbing all the bright flavors of garlic, vinegar, and parsley. When served cold in glass bowls, they shimmered with oil and herbs, perfectly ready to sit alongside cheeses, olives, and cocktail onions. They weren't rich or heavy, but clean and refreshing, offering a break between the indulgent bites of bacon and cheese that ruled the table. The best thing about them was their make-ahead magic, prepared the night before, served straight from the fridge. They captured the decade's fascination with modern entertaining, quick, stylish, and efficient. Guests loved their tangy pop of flavor, and even people who swore they hated mushrooms would sneak back for seconds. Each bite tasted like something from a European cafe, a little elegant escape in the middle of a suburban holiday party. Marinated mushrooms might not have been the flashiest appetizer, but they were the quiet favorite that kept showing up year after year. Party rye pizza bites were the life of the party, crispy, cheesy, and irresistibly snackable. Made on tiny squares of cocktail rye bread, they were topped with sausage, melted cheddar, and a dusting of oregano. The smell alone could fill a house with anticipation. These little toasts were bite-sized comfort, meant to be eaten standing up, laughing with a drink in hand. They were a favorite for busy hosts who needed something hearty but quick. Guests loved how they packed so much flavor into something so small. The texture was perfection, the crunch of the toast meeting the gooey melt of cheese. Magazine ads of the decade called them mini pizzas for the modern hostess, and that's exactly what they were: fast, fun, and delicious. Party rye pizza bites captured the flavor of the 1970s in one perfect mouthful. Simple, social, and endlessly satisfying. Stuffed celery logs might sound humble today, but in the 1970s they were a Christmas staple. Bright green celery sticks filled with pimento cheese or blue cheese spread brought color and crunch to every table. Arranged neatly on crystal trays, they looked fresh and festive among the heavier appetizers. They were light enough to nibble between sips of punch, but flavorful enough to stand out on their own. The contrast of creamy filling and crisp celery was classic, and every family had their own twist. Some added walnuts, others olives, some even sprinkled paprika for flair. They were the kind of dish that spoke of care. Washed, filled, trimmed, and arranged by hand. The beauty of stuffed celery logs was that they belonged everywhere: church potlucks, office parties, or Christmas Eve buffets. They were healthy without trying, nostalgic without being fussy, and comforting in their simplicity. For many, just one bite can bring back the memory of formica tables, colored glass plates, and the laughter of loved ones long gone. Shrimp dip in a bread bowl was pure indulgence wrapped in nostalgia. Creamy, rich, and brimming with shrimp, it was the centerpiece of Christmas buffets across America. Hosts would hollow out round loaves of bread, fill them with warm seafood dip, and surround them with cubes of bread for dipping. The presentation alone was a showstopper, the kind that made guests lean in with curiosity. The dip itself was luxurious for its time. Cream cheese, mayonnaise, lemon, and shrimp folded together until velvety smooth. It was served at everything from office parties to neighborhood gatherings, an edible symbol of generosity and good taste. When people think of 1970s entertaining, this dish defines it. Comforting, shareable, and proudly over the top. The bread soaked up every drop of flavor until nothing was left but crumbs and smiles. It was the perfect combination of heart, effort, and celebration, the kind of dish that made every party feel like a special occasion. Ham and pickle roll-ups were the simplest party trick in the 1970s playbook, yet they never failed to impress. A slice of deli ham spread thin with cream cheese, rolled tight around a dill pickle, and sliced into neat rounds. It was genius in its simplicity. Hosts loved them because they could be made ahead of time, chilled overnight, and served cold on silver trays without fuss. Guests loved them because they hit every flavor at once: salty, tangy, creamy, and crisp. These little spirals of joy appeared at every Christmas gathering, church potluck, and family reunion, vanishing faster than anything else on the table. The combination of pink ham and green pickle made them look festive, too, a subtle nod to the colors of the season. Housewives clipped the recipe from magazines, knowing it would never fail. It was food that welcomed you in, that said, "We made something just for you." The crunch of that first bite, followed by the soft creaminess of the cheese, was the sound of holidays spent laughing with friends around a crowded kitchen table. Cheese and grape kebabs were little bursts of cheer that brightened every 1970s holiday table. They were as simple as pushing cubes of cheddar and fresh grapes onto toothpicks, yet they felt surprisingly elegant. The mix of salty cheese and juicy sweetness gave a refreshing contrast to the heavy casseroles and dips of the decade. Served upright in crystal glasses or stuck into a halved orange for flair, they were edible decorations as much as appetizers. Kids loved them because they were colorful, and adults loved them because they looked refined without the effort. You could make dozens in minutes, and they'd disappear even faster. In an age when every party had punch bowls and lava lamps glowing nearby, these kebabs fit right in, bright, playful, and easy to enjoy. The beauty of them was in their honesty. Nothing fancy, just good ingredients paired perfectly. They were proof that even in a decade known for processed food, something simple and fresh could still steal the show. Mini sausages in barbecue jelly sauce were the slow cooker's claim to fame in the 1970s entertaining. Sweet, smoky, and sticky, these little bites were served bubbling hot straight from the pot. Hosts would pour in a mix of grape jelly and barbecue sauce, toss in the tiny sausages, and let time do the rest. The smell alone could pull guests toward the kitchen before they even took off their coats. It was the kind of dish that required no explanation. Everyone knew it. Everyone loved it. Each bite carried the cozy flavor of comfort food disguised as a party treat. Served with toothpicks or skewers, they brought warmth and laughter to cocktail hours and Christmas buffets alike. They represented everything the 1970s valued in food: convenience, creativity, and togetherness. No fancy plating, no complicated ingredients, just the joy of something that tasted like home. Hot crab dip was pure luxury for the middle-class dreamer of the 1970s. Served bubbling from Pyrex dishes, it combined canned crab meat, cream cheese, and a splash of sherry into something rich and comforting. Every scoop brought up melted cheese and tender crab, warm enough to melt the winter chill. It was the kind of dish people brought proudly to church suppers or block parties, where the smell alone turned heads. The dip became a quiet symbol of aspiration, something that felt fancy but was still affordable. Housewives loved that it could be reheated, men loved that it was hearty, and kids just knew it was delicious. You'd find it surrounded by Ritz crackers and cut vegetables, the Pyrex dish steaming softly beside the punch bowl. The first bite always felt indulgent, creamy and smooth, with just enough seafood to taste like something special. It was one of those rare recipes that could turn an ordinary evening into a celebration. Spinach balls were small, green wonders that turned humble ingredients into pure party magic. Frozen spinach, breadcrumbs, cheese, and herbs were mixed together and baked until golden and fragrant. The result was a bite-sized morsel bursting with flavor, crispy on the outside and tender inside. They were practical too, easy to make ahead, easy to freeze, and even easier to eat. Guests loved popping them straight from the platter, one after another, until the tray was empty. The taste was warm and savory, with a hint of garlic and nutmeg that made them feel festive without being fussy. For many, they were the healthy appetizer that somehow didn't taste like one. Every bite carried the earthy aroma of spinach and the richness of Parmesan, perfectly balanced to please everyone at the table. In a decade obsessed with convenience, these were proof that you could make something wholesome and still have time to enjoy the party. Smoked oyster canapes were the daring delight of sophisticated 1970s hosts. Small, smoky oysters were placed on crackers, topped with a dab of cocktail sauce or cream cheese, and garnished with a sprig of parsley. It was the appetizer that whispered elegance, even when the oysters came from a can. People served them on mirrored trays or tiered platters, often beside chilled martinis or mulled wine. There was a thrill in offering something that felt refined, something borrowed from coastal cuisine but brought to the suburban table. The contrast of creamy, salty, and smoky flavors made them stand out among the crowd of casseroles and meatballs. It wasn't about showing off. It was about offering guests a taste of the wider world. For a generation discovering sophistication through magazines and dinner parties, smoked oyster canapes were a small but powerful step into modern entertaining. Tangy cheese ring with strawberry preserves brought a touch of southern warmth to Christmas buffets across America. Bright orange cheddar was grated fine, mixed with pecans and spices, and shaped into a perfect ring. In the center went a glossy pool of strawberry preserves, ready for dipping crackers and spreading on bread. The combination of salty cheese and sweet fruit felt indulgent, festive, and entirely unique. It was a dish that caught the eye before it ever reached the taste buds, its colors glowing like holiday lights. Guests loved the surprise of flavors, a perfect balance of sharp, creamy, and sugary. This was food meant to bring people together, to encourage dipping, sharing, and laughter. Every bite carried the comfort of homemade Southern hospitality, reminding everyone that Christmas was about warmth, generosity, and joy. Stuffed cherry tomatoes added a pop of color to every 1970s Christmas table. Bright red tomatoes, tiny and glossy, were carefully hollowed and filled with herbed cream cheese or tuna salad. The sight of them lined neatly on glass platters made the whole spread look cheerful and alive. They were cool, creamy, and perfectly bite-sized, light enough to balance out the heavier party fare. Guests appreciated their freshness, especially amid the sea of fried and baked dishes. Each bite offered the burst of juicy tomato, followed by smooth filling and a hint of spice. They were proof that elegance could come in the smallest package. Stuffed cherry tomatoes weren't just food, they were decoration, flavor, and festivity rolled into one. Pigs in a blanket with spicy mustard were pure nostalgia baked golden brown. Tiny cocktail franks were wrapped snugly in crescent roll dough and baked until flaky and crisp. They were the hit of every holiday party, loved by kids and adults alike. Served warm with a side of tangy mustard, they brought out the child in everyone. It was impossible to eat just one. The smell, the crunch, the salty bite made them irresistible. They fit every kind of celebration, from fancy gatherings to family movie nights. In a time when food was about fun and comfort, these little rolls were the definition of both. No dish captured the casual joy of the 1970s better than a tray of pigs in a blanket disappearing in minutes. Cucumber rounds with salmon spread were the picture of 1970s chic. Thinly sliced cucumbers topped with creamy pink salmon spread made every tray look elegant and refreshing. They were light, cool, and crisp, a perfect balance to the rich casseroles and buttery dips of the season. The salmon spread, often whipped with mayonnaise and lemon juice, added just enough luxury to make it feel special. Hosts served them on glass trays beside martini glasses and shrimp cocktails, giving even small gatherings a touch of sophistication. They were effortless, yet graceful. Food that looked fancy, but felt familiar. Every bite was refreshing, a little sea breeze amid the holiday bustle. Cucumber rounds with salmon spread reminded everyone that good taste didn't have to be complicated. It only needed care. Holiday cheese spread tree was the shining star of the 1970s Christmas buffet. Molded carefully into the shape of a tree, it was made from layers of cheddar, cream cheese, and herbs, all smoothed together into a festive centerpiece. Housewives would decorate it with sliced olives, bits of pimento, and parsley sprigs until it looked almost too pretty to eat. It was both art and appetizer, a playful mix of creativity and nostalgia. Guests admired it before diving in with crackers, each swipe leaving a little dent in its glossy surface. The flavor was rich and tangy, balancing creamy cheese with the salty bite of garnish. In a decade where presentation mattered just as much as taste, this dish embodied the spirit of celebration. Impressive but approachable. It didn't matter if it leaned a little kitsch. That was part of its charm. The cheese spread tree was proof that joy could be sculpted by hand and served with pride. Vienna sausage kebabs were one of those dishes that walked the line between silly and sensational. Threaded onto toothpicks with chunks of pineapple and green pepper, these tiny canned sausages turned into something downright charming under the twinkle of Christmas lights. Their glossy coating from a sweet glaze gave them that unmistakable 70s shine, the kind only gelatin and syrup could achieve. They were an ode to a time when convenience food was something to celebrate, not hide. The balance of smoky sausage, tart fruit, and savory glaze somehow just worked, even if logic said it shouldn't. Every bite was sweet, tangy, and oddly satisfying. Guests loved how fun they looked, colorful, bright, and bursting with personality. You could tell a good party by how fast these vanished from the tray. They were the edible version of a disco ball, flashy, nostalgic, and impossible to forget. Sweet and sour meatballs on toothpicks were the lifeblood of every 1970s potluck and Christmas party. You could smell them before you saw them. The mix of vinegar, sugar, and tomato sauce bubbling away in a slow cooker. Tiny meatballs glistened in their sauce, served piping hot, skewered one by one for eager hands. They hit that perfect middle ground between dinner and snack, hearty but bite-sized. Hosts loved them because they could feed a crowd on a budget and keep guests smiling all night. The flavor was balanced, sweet at first, then tangy enough to make you go back for more. No table felt complete without that familiar dish simmering in the background, steam curling above it. These meatballs weren't fancy, but they didn't need to be. They were delicious, comforting, and familiar. Every toothpick carried a little piece of the era's warmth, a memory of laughter, conversation, and clinking glasses in homes across America. Green Goddess dip with crudités was elegance served in a chilled ceramic bowl. Vibrant green and velvety smooth, it was a dip made from sour cream, mayonnaise, parsley, tarragon, and anchovy, rich yet refreshing. The name alone gave it a kind of mystique, something divine and indulgent. Hosts would surround it with crisp vegetables, carrots, celery, radishes, and broccoli, arranged neatly like a painter's palette. It was a taste of California cool that swept across the country, the perfect blend of health and hedonism. The herbal aroma filled the air, cutting through the heavier smells of bacon and cheese that dominated most holiday spreads. Every dip felt sophisticated, a little escape from the usual party fare. It was food for the modern entertainer, proof that you could serve something wholesome and still make it feel glamorous. The Green Goddess dip became the quiet star of many 1970s Christmas tables, a little taste of paradise in a chilled bowl. Cocktail rye canapes with shrimp paste were dainty, decorative, and undeniably 70s. Neat squares of dark rye bread were spread with creamy shrimp paste, sometimes topped with a sliver of lemon or parsley for color. They looked like something from a magazine, tiny, elegant, and perfectly portioned. The flavor was rich and savory, with the rye's earthy bitterness balancing the smooth seafood spread. Guests would pick them up delicately from tiered platters, savoring each small bite as conversation hummed around them. These canapes were for the host who cared about presentation, who wanted every detail just right. They belonged to the cocktail hour crowd, the ones sipping white wine or punch beneath gold garlands. Simple to make, yet endlessly stylish, they represented a decade obsessed with refinement and novelty. Every bite carried the taste of aspiration, a touch of luxury right at home. Cheese-stuffed dates wrapped in bacon were the epitome of sweet and savory bliss. The combination sounded strange on paper, but once you tried one, it was impossible to stop. Sticky dates were filled with soft cheese, wrapped snugly in bacon, and baked until the fat turned crisp and golden. The result was pure magic, chewy, creamy, salty, and sweet all at once. Served warm on toothpicks, they glistened under the glow of candlelight and Christmas decor. Guests would reach for them faster than anything else on the table. Each bite felt indulgent yet comforting, a tiny gift of flavor. These were the appetizers that made people close their eyes after the first bite, a little moment of joy amid the party buzz. They embodied the playful confidence of 1970s food, bold, experimental, and utterly unforgettable. Party pineapple skewers brought sunshine to the coldest holiday nights. Colorful cubes of pineapple, melon, and maraschino cherry were glazed in honey or rum, threaded on toothpicks like edible ornaments. They gleamed under party lights, a burst of tropical color among casseroles and cheese plates. The first bite was bright and sweet, instantly lifting the mood. These skewers captured the decade's fascination with the exotic. Hawaiian shirts, tiki bars, and palm trees in suburban basements. They were refreshing, fun, and a little bit rebellious, proof that not all Christmas dishes had to be heavy or traditional. Kids loved the sweetness, adults loved the nostalgia of island getaways, and everyone loved how pretty they looked on the tray. They turned a Midwestern living room into a tropical dream, one juicy bite at a time. Mini quiches with ham and onion were the new face of convenience cooking in the 1970s, a decade when homemakers sought ease without losing elegance. They began with humble biscuit dough pressed carefully into metal muffin tins, ready to rise into golden, buttery shells. Into each went a rich mixture of beaten eggs, diced ham, sautéed onion, and shredded cheese, simple ingredients that transformed together in the oven. As they baked, the kitchen filled with the scent of comfort, warm bread, smoky ham, and melting cheddar blending into something familiar yet refined. They emerged puffed and fragrant, light enough for cocktail hour, but hearty enough for supper. Served warm or room temperature, they became the ideal entertainer's dish, easy to prepare, impressive to present, and impossible to resist. Guests marveled at their delicacy, as though these little pastries had traveled from a Parisian cafe straight to a suburban dining table. Every bite delivered a perfect balance of texture, the crisp crust giving way to a creamy, tender center that melted on the tongue. They were modern magic, proof that sophistication could come from a can of biscuit dough and a handful of leftovers. Mini quiches captured the optimism of 1970s home cooking, the belief that speed and beauty could live on the same plate. Whether served beside punch glasses or under tinsel and candlelight, they turned ordinary gatherings into something memorable. Even decades later, their smell alone can bring back the feeling of a warm, bustling kitchen filled with laughter. Retro relish trays with pickled vegetables were the quiet backbone of every 1970s Christmas spread. They arrived before the roasts and casseroles, set out early so guests could graze as they chatted in living rooms thick with the scent of pine and cinnamon. Each tray was a work of care, gherkins lined in rows, green and black olives glistening beside bright radishes and celery sticks. Some families added pickled cauliflower, carrot curls, or even baby corn, each one arranged with almost ceremonial precision. The briny tang of the pickles balanced the richness of holiday food, cleansing the palate between bites of creamy dips or buttery rolls. Housewives displayed them proudly on glass or silver platters, often the same ones passed down from mothers and grandmothers. They were as much about tradition as taste. In an age when processed and packaged foods filled store shelves, the relish tray remained refreshingly simple and real, a nod to the homegrown gardens and canning jars that still lingered in memory. There was no need for heat, no recipe cards, just the careful touch of arrangement and presentation. Tomato aspic squares with cream cheese topping stood at the crossroads of courage and creativity in 1970s cooking. Gleaming in shades of red that caught the light like stained glass, they were culinary art, strange, daring, and utterly unforgettable. The base was made from tomato juice blended with unflavored gelatin and a dash of vinegar, then poured into molds to set firm in the refrigerator. Once chilled, a smooth topping of whipped cream cheese was spread across the surface, turning each square into a perfect red and white layer of savory holiday flair. When sliced into precise cubes, they became tiny jewels arranged in neat rows on serving platters, ready to surprise and confuse guests in equal measure. The first bite was a revelation. Cool, tangy, and slightly sweet, unlike anything else on the table. Some found the flavor refreshing, others smiled politely and moved on, but everyone remembered it. These aspic squares embodied the decade's adventurous spirit when home cooks experimented fearlessly with gelatin molds, color, and texture. They were conversation starters, symbols of effort and originality, proof that entertaining could be both fun and fearless. Savory bread pudding with sausage was what home smelled like in December. Cubes of stale bread soaked in milk, eggs, and stock until they turned soft as clouds. Sausage browned in a skillet, its fat mixing with onions, celery, and pepper before joining the pudding dish. Baked until the edges turned crisp and the center stayed custardy, it came out golden and steaming. The first spoonful tasted like warmth itself, salty, rich, and comforting. In the 1940s, this dish sat proudly beside roasts, feeding big families with little waste. It filled bellies and hearts alike, stretching ingredients farther than they should have gone. Leftovers, if there were any, tasted even better reheated the next day. Savory bread pudding with sausage was proof that thrift and flavor could live side by side in perfect harmony. Oyster dressing was Christmas on the coast, where the ocean met the table. It was made with bread cubes, celery, onions, and oysters stirred in at the very end, so the flavor stayed gentle and briny. For many families, it wasn't Christmas dinner without it. The scent of butter, sea, and sage filled the house long before the guests arrived. It was a dish that carried generations, fishermen, grandmothers, Sunday cooks, all leaving their mark with one small change to the recipe. It wasn't fancy, but it was rich in its own right, proof that you didn't need wealth to have something special. As seafood prices rose and tastes changed, the old coastal dressing disappeared from most menus, but for those who grew up with it, no stuffing since has ever felt quite right. oyster dressing was Christmas on the coast, where the ocean met the table. It was made with bread cubes, celery, onions, and oysters stirred in at the very end, so the flavor stayed gentle and briny. For many families, it wasn't Christmas dinner without it. The scent of butter, sea, and sage filled the house long before the guests arrived. It was a dish that carried generations: fishermen, grandmothers, Sunday cooks, all leaving their mark with one small change to the recipe. It wasn't fancy, but it was rich in its own right, proof that you didn't need wealth to have something special. As seafood prices rose and tastes changed, the old coastal dressing disappeared from most menus. But for those who grew up with it, no stuffing since has ever felt quite right. Osgood pies were the height of America's experimental phase of adding all kinds of fruits like pecans and raisins to the mixture and using them as fillings. Single crust pies and simple ingredients equaled a pie that stuck to traditional flavors but did them really well. Hanging close to your roots and nailing the execution is the story behind many great recipes across history, and Osgood pies were no different from the rest in that regard. Maybe you might remember coming over to your aunt's to a tray of this? Puffy and soft slices of the most savory but sweet dessert that put a pep back in your step. No aunt these days would be baking a fashionable old Osgood now, though. Remember when your mom used to whip you up lunch for school along with a heartfelt note and a sweet treat? Meat and potato patties were a staple back in the day and a hit in the lunchbox. If you've got some leftover mashed potatoes lying around, you've got to try these. Yeah, these are basically patties made out of mashed potatoes combined with seasoned ground meat, shaped into little discs, and fried till golden brown. They pair perfectly with ketchup, your favorite dipping sauce, or even a dollop of sour cream for a tangy twist. Meat and potato patties are the ultimate finger food that is still a hit to this day. Well, with McDonald's French fries on the rise, these really don't make an appearance that often, but you can whip these patties up anytime. They're surprisingly easy to make. Just give your mom a call and ask for the recipe. Parslied potatoes were proof that simplicity could sparkle. Small new potatoes were boiled until tender, then rolled through a bath of melted butter until their skins shone. A generous handful of fresh parsley was tossed in at the end, its bright green flecks turning the humble dish into something quietly festive. The scent rose warm and buttery, a gentle promise of comfort that drifted from the kitchen to the table. Each bite was soft, salty, and clean, a small pause between the heavier flavors of gravy and roast. They were never the centerpiece, but they grounded every plate, steady, dependable, and full of quiet charm. Housewives in the 1940s and 1950s loved them for their ease and beauty, a way to make an ordinary dinner feel like a feast. They were served from enamel bowls, steaming and fragrant, a green promise of freshness in the middle of winter. Parslied potatoes were the kind of food everyone took for granted until the bowl was empty. Humble, pretty, and timeless, they turned every Christmas meal into something balanced, comforting, and complete. Ambrosia salad with whipped Dream Whip was the glowing bowl of color every 1960s table needed. There was something innocent and festive about it. Tiny marshmallows, canned fruit, coconut flakes, and that sweet whipped topping folded until it looked like snow. Housewives adored it because it was easy, cheerful, and foolproof, the perfect match for the glimmer of tinsel and the flicker of colored lights. It looked fancy enough for guests, but cost next to nothing to make. Kids would sneak spoonfuls when no one was looking, drawn by that sugar cloud smell. You could always find it chilling beside a glass dish of cranberry sauce, a sign that the feast had begun. Dream Whip made it smooth and glossy, almost too pretty to eat, a vision of mid-century optimism. Now it sits in the forgotten pages of community cookbooks, too sweet and too sincere for today's tables, a ghost of holiday magic that once shimmered bright. Glazed Cornish hens were this extremely popular holiday dinner in the 1980s that really kept in line with all the changing trends I've been talking about. These were centered a lot on the individual, not on large groups and servings that would take care of your whole family. Instead, a glazed Cornish hen would be adequate for one person, and that really showed Americans an entirely different kind of fun to be had with food. The idea of personalized portions for one person began to take off thanks to dishes like this, and Cornish hens were also a much healthier alternative to everything we've discussed so far. They were refined, luxurious, and seen as sophisticated, so they had a lot of selling points that roasted ham or turkey just couldn't offer up at the time. In the post-war world, thanks to the economic boom, people had a bit more faith in their wallets. However, that was quickly put to a stop by the rising inflation later on too, which definitely started to become a fact of everyday life by the 80s. As a result, people had to find a middle ground they could work with, and Cornish hens were just the perfect thing. Despite their appearance and the general perception being that they were really sophisticated, Cornish hens were super easy to make and prepare. They didn't need a lot of work at all, and that was such a stark contrast from the things Americans typically grew up with, like turkeys and crown roasts. A simple glaze, a roasting pan, and a functioning oven were all you needed for this main dish. Also, here's their ace in the hole. You could actually just make this whole thing ahead of time, keep it in the refrigerator, and then reheat it and serve it when you needed to. This was literally the perfect thing in a post-war world where people were really becoming more and more job and career focused, working long hours or sometimes even 2 jobs. At the end of the day, coming home to a dish you made on Sunday that you could reheat and have easily on Monday seemed like a blessing. Plus, you could go for a sweet glaze or a savory glaze, so the recipe really managed to earn favor with a lot of different kinds of people. Unfortunately, once people started to make this regularly, they were able to see past their first impressions and understand the dish for what it really was. No matter how it looked, it was just a simple glaze with Cornish hens, and Americans wanted a bit more spice and flavor in their food later on thanks to all the other styles of cooking that they now had firm experience with. Unfortunately, across this list, you'll find all sorts of final nails in various coffins. For Malisadas, it was just competition and bad PR. This Portuguese banger involves fried donuts that are really rich and decadent, but also really heavy and a little hard to make. You can kind of see where I'm going with this already, can't you? The thing is, Americans are pretty much creatures of habit. If you try to break away from that habit, you better be offering up gold on a plate, but if your plate consists of fried donuts with more of a regional appeal in states like Hawaii, then you might not make the cut. Another thing about Hawaii is its thriving Portuguese community, so a dish like this was always right at home there. But what about everywhere else? People thought it took a lot of work to make this dish, which would also leave you feeling pretty sluggish and bloated, plus the short shelf life really didn't help matters. People are used to their donuts lasting a long while, but with Malisadas, the texture and flavor would go up in smoke pretty quick if you just let them catch dust on a table, and eating all that in one go was never really ideal, especially if we're talking about a workday. Mix that in with the whole wave of healthy eating, and you can understand where the bad PR side of things comes from here. Bourbon fruitcakes had their fair share of dried fruit goodness too, except it came with a boozy twist. All of the fruitcake would be soaked in bourbon. While the essential dish that involved just candied fruits was well known in most states, it really took off in Kentucky. Over there, each neighborhood had their own style of bourbon fruitcake. Some people would soak it in whiskey and top it with a bourbon glaze. Others would keep the glaze but replace the whiskey with vanilla crumb frosting and use sponge cake. So you see, the idea got around and people had their fun with it. That just goes to show the boundless imagination of man to us, really, because we could not think of mixing bourbon with vanilla. However, even in states like that, this is mostly a very antique 70s dish that is not popular anymore. Speaking of baker bangers that had boozy beginnings, grasshopper cakes were meant to mimic the taste of a grasshopper cocktail and were actually a pretty refreshingly new dish. People had options for cakes, do not get us wrong, but you know the menu on your phone can suddenly start to look stale when it has the same 6 things you have always ordered. Since like the past 5 months, and that is when cakes like this were people's new way to feel good about themselves on a Friday night. Grasshopper cakes had mint cakes that were layered with chocolate fudge and topped with mint whipped cream. It was not only really popular in general for bakeries, but also a holiday favorite. There would always be sales going on for grasshopper cakes with 10 or 20% off. Nowadays, you would not find this anywhere because mint cakes are not very trendy right now. You could always try making it at home. but an authentic 70s grasshopper was something else. Biscuits and sausage gravy. Okay. This southern staple might still be a thing in some parts of the country, but let's be real, biscuits and sausage gravy is definitely not dominating breakfast menus anymore. I guess waffles are to blame for that. But this breakfast legend is the perfect combination of fluffy buttermilk biscuits so light and airy they practically melt in your mouth, along with a creamy sausage gravy, rich with savory sausage and speckled with black pepper. This is a breakfast, or hey, no judgment here, even a dinner combination that's pure comfort food heaven. From the perfect hangover cure to a delicious weekend treat, biscuits and sausage gravy satisfy all cravings. Just maybe lay off the white clothes while you're indulging. That sausage gravy can be a bit enthusiastic when it comes to staining. Cornbread dressing with sage was the southern heart of Christmas dinner, a hymn baked golden and fragrant with memory. The cornbread was crumbled into a large bowl, joined by onions, celery, and sage, so strong it filled every corner of the house. Warm broth poured over it, turning dry crumbs into something soft and rich. It baked until crisp on the edges and tender in the middle, the surface turning a deep shade of brown. Each bite carried warmth, savory, buttery, and alive with herbs. Long before boxed mixes and shortcuts, this was made by hand, a process passed from mother to daughter, written down in grease-stained notebooks, or not at all. No two families made it quite the same, but all swore theirs was best. It wasn't just food, it was belonging, a way of gathering generations through flavor and faith. Cranberry orange congealed salad was a jewel-toned treasure from refrigerator cookery's golden age. The tang of cranberries met the sweetness of oranges and the creaminess of whipped cheese, all bound together in gelatin's glossy grip. Housewives took pride in how it gleamed under dining room lights, slicing it clean to show off the layers. It was sweet enough for dessert, but still called a salad, a clever way to balance indulgence and thrift. Nuts added crunch, oranges gave brightness, and cranberries tied it all back to the season. It was cool, festive, and unmistakably mid-century. Then came the downfall of molded foods and the age of fresh, and this dish faded like tinsel after New Year's Day. Still, for those who grew up with it, no modern salad captures that same sparkle of home and holiday. Of course, if people had eggnogs and Yule log cakes, they had their cocktails, and retro rum punch definitely hits pretty hard, sometimes well above its weight class. A 1960s party cocktail that dominated the drinks menu of home events across America, retro rum punch was a really nice and easy drink to prepare. All you needed was some rum, orange mango juice, lemon juice, and some pineapple juice, and then some soda water. You could have a large punch bowl filled to the brim with these and have it empty before the guests leave, so most people always made some extra bowls just to be prepared. This is probably another thing that British Americans brought with them since it was typical in European countries, but we sure are glad they donated to the food scene of America with a pleasant rum punch. Also, it sounds so citrusy and tropical, we just would love to have a glass. These size extra-large pancakes, on the other hand, have all the star power you could want in something that migrates its way from German tables to American couches. Dutch baby pancakes are exactly how you make a first impression on a foreign audience. Appeal to the familiar, bring in the new, and find a balance between both. Flavors that Americans typically hadn't ever associated with pancakes were suddenly on the cards for them, and that went for textures too, because this really didn't feel like any pancake your mom would whip up or one available in a diner. These needed a preheated oven and had to be baked for a lot longer. One pancake per person isn't the rule here. This is very much a group meal. Unfortunately, you have to have a lot of confidence in your recipe if your aim is to shake up America's love for its convenient pancake-oriented breakfasts. These pancakes weren't as customizable because they couldn't be mixed directly into the batter, and they took a lot more time to make than regular ones did. Americans think of pancakes as a quick, perfect breakfast before work, and that's the situation they often find themselves craving one in. This did not fit that memo, and for a few more reasons, like competition from other, more convenient and trendier options of the era, Dutch baby pancakes fell off. Vinegar pies shook the baking world up at the start of the 1970s as bakeries started serving the odd pie across the states. Bakers began adding vinegar to the dough whilst also using a vinegar filling, topping it off with whipped cream. Bakeries did this because the vinegar gave the texture of the crust a pretty noticeable glow-up, while also adding a unique tartness to the pie. Usually, apple cider vinegar and brown sugar would be used to balance each other out, and the aroma as well as the set of flavors made this a holiday favorite. Everyone can remember their grandma enthusiastically coming out of the kitchen with a fat vinegar pie on Thanksgiving, right? For Americans who wanted to be whisked away to days when they were 7 and nothing mattered except hearing the school bell ringing, this pie was the one. America found other ways to have nostalgia trips eventually, and vinegar pies are now just a forgotten classic. Baked apples with currants were winter's simplest form of sweetness, a dish that turned cold nights into comfort. The apples were cored carefully, hollowed out just enough to hold a spoonful of brown sugar, a pat of butter, and a handful of dried currants. Once placed in the oven, they softened slowly, their skins splitting slightly, the insides melting into syrup. The smell filled the house with spice and caramel, warm and familiar as a wool blanket. When they came out, the syrup pooled at the bottom of the pan, golden and glossy. A spoonful broke the tender skin and revealed the soft, fragrant fruit beneath. It was dessert before dessert, light but full of flavor, rich but never heavy. Families served it plain or with cream, letting its quiet charm speak for itself. The Victorians made it for elegance. Depression-era cooks made it for survival. Yet, no matter the time or reason, it brought the same peace to the table. Baked apples with currants were humble generosity, the kind of dish that asked for little and gave everything. Ribbon gelatin molds were a Christmas miracle of patience and precision. Layer after layer, red, green, white, each one had to set before the next could be poured. Housewives guarded their molds like prized possessions, careful not to rush or ruin the design. The result was a shimmering masterpiece that looked like stained glass under the dining room light. Kids stared at it in wonder, while adults admired the effort it took to pull off something so delicate. Served in perfect slices, it was a symbol of pride and skill as much as taste. Sweet, tangy, and light, it was a small victory in a decade obsessed with beauty and order. When boxed gelatin lost its charm, so did these edible ornaments. Today, no one has the time or patience to make a dessert that waits for you, but those bright, wobbly layers once defined holiday joy. If we go into the 2000s, we can find green bean almondine, which is a pretty classic French dish. I won't say this disappeared entirely like the rest of the items on the list, but it's definitely not in its glory days. Still, it was the popular thing to make for a while, even if its run got cut short later on. It was seen as an elegant dish perfect for formal dinners, so it was very popular in upper-class circles. Green bean almondine's biggest trait was its tender but crispy green beans that were mixed in this very buttery sauce served with toasted almonds. As far as health goes, you really can't outdo this. One of the reasons people began to look towards other cultures so much was that they wanted ideas on how to diversify their cooking and make it healthier, since American cookbooks simply weren't the best for that. Luckily, the French had lots of ideas for that, and almondine was something people took happily from French-American communities and restaurant menus. They would often experiment with non-traditional ways to make the sauces too, and a lot of variations came out, some of which didn't even involve green beans. Still, green beans weren't ever exactly Uncle Sam's favorite vegetable, and a lot of the masses would agree with that sentiment. Things like broccoli and asparagus would eventually take over, and the 2000s also saw something else that no other decade really had to deal with. They had all these pre-packaged side dishes and frozen vegetables, and a lot of these were pre-made and didn't even need to be microwaved. Plus, work culture was busier than ever, especially thanks to all kinds of new technical and desk jobs popping up thanks to advancements in computers and technology. People wanted practical, easy-to-make food that could even be prepared using convenience food that was already available in stores. There was a big shift towards pre-packaged and frozen stuff, and green bean almondine couldn't keep up with all that. Over time, it simply faded away. as did many things from the 2000s, despite how they were only 20-odd years ago. Creamed celery with almonds was the hidden gem of 1920s hotel dining, grace disguised as a side dish. Stalks of celery, once humble and crisp, were simmered gently until soft, then bathed in a velvety white sauce made of butter, cream, and flour. Slivered almonds sprinkled on top added a satisfying crunch that broke through the creaminess. The dish shimmered pale green and ivory, elegant without trying too hard. Served beside roasts or fish, it added quiet sophistication to any table. The scent was light but luxurious, a blend of butter and warmth that drifted through the room. In grand hotels, it was served beneath silver covers. In home kitchens, it arrived in chipped baking dishes. But in both, it meant the same thing: care, taste, and celebration. For Christmas, it offered something different, rich but delicate, indulgent but refined. It was the kind of food that made people sit up a little straighter, even at the family table. Creamed celery with almonds was grace in a casserole dish, a taste of gentility that turned simple ingredients into an unforgettable holiday memory. Cowboy breakfasts were definitely something to cherish when they were the heart and soul of American breakfasts, especially around the frontier and the South. But now, very much like the infamous outlaws themselves, their time has passed. People today go for lighter meals. They want health-conscious things that make their skin glow, give them a basket full of vitamins, and help keep their body in tune. That's just not anything you'd ever picture being used to describe a cowboy breakfast, which was typically full of things like fried bacon and eggs, biscuits and hash browns and whatnot. There was definitely a focus on using whatever you had on hand with the cowboy breakfast, which makes sense since actual cowboys lived a pretty nomadic lifestyle, using whatever they could find in the wild as a breakfast or a stew. Still, even that couldn't really keep it running because whether or not this is how actual cowboys ate, for people, the whole breakfast wasn't complete without a hefty serving of greasy stuff on a bed of eggs. Over time, that wasn't a sustainable breakfast at all, especially when there was healthier, lighter, and greener stuff out there, which was also a lot easier to make. Lasagna as a Christmas dinner is definitely a new one, but it's also an in-between. It's got meat, it's also got dairy. And if you really wanted to, it could also have vegetables. So it's the most agreeable middle ground we've been able to find so far. Lasagna really took off during the COVID era though, because thanks to the pandemic, people were shut in for the better part of 2 whole years in 2021 and 2022. That really makes those long winter nights so much more lonely, and as a result, the need for comfort food hits harder than ever. Lasagna was the perfect thing since it was easy to make at home and scratch the itch like nothing else, and it's also one of the most versatile dishes you can ever make. If you want to be vegetarian, you can do that. If you like your things gluten-free, there are an infinite amount of variations for you. If you want a plant-based lasagna, that's there too, and if you want something that's nothing but meat and cheese, then, well, history has definitely favored you. Basically, there was never anybody who didn't have a lasagna that was right up their alley. Plus, it was really good for social media. Home cooks started to really go all in on influencer culture and getting viral posts of dishes that looked good and tasted better, and a big part of that was focusing on stuff you could easily make at home. Lasagna was the poster boy for trends like that. Maybe you could say Garfield helped it pop off too. Thanks to COVID though, holidays weren't really as formal as they used to be. They just became casual celebrations, and a lot of them were spent indoors anyway. I think the most popular places for lasagna would have been around the Northeast and Midwest, and they even had seafood lasagna over there. However, people have started to go back to their usual pre-pandemic lifestyles again ever since it luckily ended, and lasagnas are starting to take a little bit of a backseat again in favor of more organic, dairy-free eating. Still, that doesn't mean they vanished like the rest of the stuff on our list has. They're still a big player in everyone's menus, and I doubt that's ever really going to change. So chicken paprikash is a Hungarian dish that sounds fancy, but is basically a party in a pot for your taste buds. Imagine juicy chicken pieces slow-cooked with tender onions in a creamy sauce, bursting with the warm, smoky flavor of paprika. It's served with a side of fluffy rice or noodles. chicken paprikash really found its footing back when Chinese takeout wasn't as big of a thing. You know, back when Grandma used to put on the apron and cook for us? This dish really was the one-pot wonder. Bonus points. If your grandma used to whip this up for you, that nostalgia factor is real. A version of it still exists in Bulgarian cuisine in case you crave the it now. The Bulgarians are a little light on the paprika and center the dish on sautéed onions. Okay, creamed spinach and pearl onions didn't look the most appetizing, but trust me, it was always a hit at family dinners. Think of a rich, creamy base packed with vibrant green spinach leaves. And let's not forget the star of the show, pearl onions, that added the perfect touch of sweetness. Not only was this dinner finger-licking delicious, but it was healthy too. Jam-packed with nutrients including vitamins A, C, and K, iron, folate, potassium, and a good amount of fiber. Just don't blame me if you get flashbacks to your school cafeteria. But hey, sometimes those cafeteria classics deserve a second chance, especially when they're this delicious and healthy all at the same time. Tell us which 70s appetizer you'd bring back, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more tastes of Christmas past.